All right, we're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Places, the Pantheist Experience, the show where we explore pantheism, atheism, philosophy, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pafo Ortiz, and joining me today will be my good friend Chandler Klebs. What we
Hi.
want to talk, there's Chandler. What we want to talk about today, essentially, is what makes the distinction between atheism and pantheism, or more specifically, where is the dividing line between an atheist and a pantheist? Um, some would say that atheists believe in nothing. They say that there is no God, and pantheists believe that everything is God. So that seems like a pretty big disparity, but I beg to differ. I actually believe that atheism is a more expedient route to pantheism. And essentially, if you are a compassionate, kind-hearted, logical person, um, moving in the direction towards sustainability, and if you care about the environment, if you love nature, you're much more inclined to lean towards pantheism. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what pantheism really is. So this being our first show, we're going to try and clarify some of that. And hopefully this will be a positive experience for everyone. We're going to see if we can sort of bring Chandler over to our ranks today. I think he's already there, but we'll see how it goes. So
Yeah. And what I would like to start out saying to our audience here is that, see, my perception of pantheism, as well as the perception of many atheists when it comes to pantheism, as I'm sure you know, Richard Dawkins is famous for saying it's sexed up atheism. And, as if it's like just some fancy language that people add to their existing atheism and start calling the universe God. And that's my perception. And when you look at it from that perspective, it just kind of looks stupid, But
sure. I've encountered many people who view pantheism in that way, that it's sort of a superlative. It's unnecessary. Like it doesn't, there doesn't need to be, we already have a perfectly good word for the universe, and it's the universe. So when you call it God, it just muddies the waters and it confuses things, because people have so many negative associations, or positive associations with their delusion of the concept of the man in the sky. um, so is it really just about language and semantics, or is there something more to this? And I am almost 100% positive that there is a, let's just say, a greater dimension to this idea, because what you have essentially is religious naturalism. Okay, religious naturalists, uh, obviously, as opposed to supernaturalism, view the natural world as the source of inspiration and reverence and awe and wonder. And well, where does that come from? That just comes from a greater awareness of that natural world. So those who are sort of confined in urban areas, living in a city, and aren't really interacting with the natural world, they don't live in a rural setting, they're not going to be as inclined to have this perspective. But those who work in close proximity with nature, and deal every day with plants and animals and the sciences and biology and chemistry and whatever it might be, it could be cosmology and astronomy. We're really just talking about a deeper awareness of the natural processes, and that actually, it goes deeper than that, but that's what's necessary. So there's a distinction there, because you can not believe in the traditional anthropomorphic God as pantheists do. We don't believe in a transcendent deity, but then what makes the difference? Like a pantheist and an atheist will still say, but nature is indifferent, nature is cold and cruel, and nature is out to get us and out to kill us. Well, that's true, but that's not the whole story, is it, Chandler? Nature is also there providing for us and nurturing us and taking care of us and giving us everything we need. And nature in our bodies is continuously communicating to us and speaking to us and helping us and healing us, and sort of maintaining these autonomic systems that we don't even think about consciously, that are going on like at all times. So there are forces and powers that are beyond us, that are benevolent. Okay, now listen carefully. There are forces and powers that are beyond us, that are altruistic and helpful to us. But the distinction is, within those forces and powers, there is also a dichotomy. There is also natural selection and survival of the fittest, and there are the cruel and inhumane and very ugly aspects of nature as well. So the pantheist takes all of that, and we view the whole as a beautiful and sacred and divine process, not necessarily glorifying death and entropy and starvation and sickness and disease, but recognizing that there are useful purposes to these things, and it all leads to a form of progress. Like, there is a teleological perspective here that atheists generally tend to disregard, which I think we've talked about it many times, that nature, that evolution is actually bringing us down a certain path. We're moving in a direction towards greater and greater levels of cohesion and self-awareness and consciousness. That consciousness is essentially the goal. So this is very different than what most strict, I'd say, fundamentalist, atheists would say. And of course, atheism just means you deny the existence of a theistic God, and that's all that means.
And here's what I would like to clarify is,
yeah.
I think we live in a world where the majority of people are one of the monotheistic religions, the Christian, Islamic or Muslim, and then there's the Jews, and I think what atheism is, people, they don't even understand atheism, because to them, like, they don't understand. They think that atheist means you're an immoral person, like that you're just disobedient to God, or you just want to sin, So first of all, people don't understand atheism, and it's important for them to understand atheism in order to get them to biopantheism. It's important that they first understand, what an atheist is, to then understand how an atheist can go beyond that.
Many religious people, sort of by default, they equate the lack of religious beliefs with immorality, because they're so strongly associating their particular faith with the development of ethics and morals, of value system. So in their minds, as long as you have some form of religion, then that means you're a good moral person. And atheism essentially means you've denied and rejected all religion and all supernatural beliefs. So how can you possibly be a moral person if you're rejecting what they consider to be the source of morality? And that's where it comes from. But obviously, as we know, religion can be used for good or for evil purposes. So in the absence of supernatural beliefs, you don't have immorality. You just have the absence of supernatural beliefs. You have a more rational, logical, reasonable worldview that's based on evidence and demonstrable, basically empirical evidence is what lays the groundwork, the basis for reality, as opposed to mythology and delusion, which is absolutely the direction we need to move in. So I support the atheist movement 100%. But here's the distinction. Excuse me. It doesn't stop there, because once you know what not to believe, you're still left with all the existential questions, all the great unanswerable questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What's my purpose? What do I do with my life? How should I live my life? What is consciousness? Like, where are we headed? Like, looking for significance and meaning. And these questions are answered, unfortunately, by the systems that are already in place, by the religious systems that are already there, that are more than eager to give us their predetermined answers. So what biopan and what pantheism represents is bridging the gap. It's the communion between science and spirituality. You understand? And I said earlier that okay, what makes the difference? I said there is no transcendent world, but we can have a transcendent experience, and there is no intervening personal anthropomorphic all-powerful creator, but there is a creator, and we know that it's nature, and there is a creative power, and there are forces and elements that are extraordinary and miraculous and even mystical. And so what the pantheist, and specifically what the biopan does, is he looks at the natural world and sees it for what it actually is, this miraculous, autonomous, self-organizing, perpetual system that brings about conscious life all on its own, without any, without us. And so you can't say we are the pinnacle of creation, we're just a of causal events, when actually these causal events are leading to greater and greater levels of self-awareness and cohesion and organization. So we have this self-organizing system that you would just say is a machine. It's a thoughtless, random machine. No, there's more to it than that. And so that's like a starting point, is you recognizing that, yes, we're all atheists when it comes to the Abrahamic faiths and the monotheistic God concept of God. But there is something to it, because there is something that exists that is all powerful and is essentially perpetual, eternal, and is really everywhere at once. The only definition for what could possibly be omnipresent is nature. That you can't have an omnipresent God. You can't have a personal God that's everywhere at once, all at the same time. He's got video cameras up everywhere. He's got surveillance, and there's like thousands of TV screens, so he's watching every single angle of everything.
Like the Matrix.
Like the Matrix, like the architect. It makes no sense. So what we really, you have pantheistic elements, within these within the world's religions. So anyway, but go ahead, Chandler, and we really need to let's keep this focused and really address. Okay, I think we've covered a little bit of your experience of pantheism, and maybe it just seems redundant to a certain extent.
Yeah, but this is all new to our listeners.
Are you starting to understand now that there is more to it beyond just semantics?
Well, I think so, but it's really hard getting beyond the semantics, because since we have to communicate using words, I find these words trip me up so badly, Sure.
And listen, I got something for you here. Let's not use religious language at all. Let's talk about the natural world, and I won't use any of the terms which pantheists are taking back the religious terms, and we don't believe that the the monotheistic faiths should have a monopoly on religious language, and we don't believe that the religious experience should be relegated to just people who believe in the Quran and the Bible and the Torah. We know that any person, any human being, any individual can have a transformative religious experience, and it could come through poetry, it could come through music. Many times, especially for pantheists, it comes through interaction with the natural world. So it's okay. We can talk about things using sort of non-loaded terms. Right. So from here on out, let's just do that. I'll speak to you as I would speak to an atheist. Okay, Chandler, what is your attitude toward nature? Because that's what really makes the difference between an atheist and a pantheist. What is your perspective, your perception of the natural world?
Well, there are two basic things. The first one is realizing that I am part of this whole system, whether we call it nature or the universe or life or whatever we call it. I understand that both in a moral sense and both in a biological sense, I am the same as all the other things. And here's what I mean, Pafo, is I understand that even the matter that makes up this body is the same matter that's been recycled from, you know, billions of years of plants and animals that die and then get reformed as new life, get eaten by other plants and animals. And I understand that literally in the physical sense, I am life, I am carbon, I am, you know, genetics, DNA, all of this stuff. And so there's the literal piece of that, but then there's comes something else, with the understanding that literally we are physically interrelated with everything else that ever has died before and everything that will come after us. Also comes the understanding that there's no superiority between us and someone else. Like, we're all part of the same thing, really. We can't try to claim that we have an independent self, that we're more important, more deserving, that our life is more valuable than something else. And here's where it gets interesting, Pafo, is this is in direct opposition to the Abrahamic religions, as well as other many more minor systems of thought, because they're very anthropocentric or human-centered. They're all about, you know, humans are made in God's image, they're special, and well, if you know, if we kill cows and sheep and dogs, you know, that doesn't really matter, because all that matters is humans. Only humans have souls. So they have this human-centered view of things, and I hate that, like, because it's not only is it not accurate, you know, humans are just one of many animals, but it causes unbelievable amounts of harm. You know, and we're in agreement on that, obviously. The whole vegan movement is based on seeing those other animals as our equals and not doing to them what we wouldn't want done to us. So it all fits together.
Okay, so let me stop you before we go too far. But okay, everything that you just stated, okay, that's pantheistic. Everything you just said, you covered so many different aspects of it. Everything you just said is indicative of a person who understands the real world, who understands nature and science. Everything you just said can be ascertained through studying biology and science, but most people do not have that understanding. Okay, so there's a difference there, and most atheists don't have that attitude toward nature. Okay, what you'll find is environmentalists and people who are into wildlife conservation and who have a care and concern for the earth, for the ecosystems, for the biosphere. They have this mentality, and what it boils down to, it's called biocentrism. Like, it's a life-centered philosophy. It's recognizing, like, as you said, you said it perfectly. The distinctions. It's in contrast to an egocentric or even an anthropocentric mentality. This is a biocentric attitude. So everything you just described is pantheistic. It's just not labeled as such in these different groups. And what I'm saying is, a lot of atheists don't have that attitude. They have a very, they have a negative, sort of pessimistic attitude toward nature, not necessarily toward people. Most are humanists. Most want to see us progress and evolve, and are seeking equality and human rights, and you know, greater and greater, let's say greater and greater levels of consciousness, of human evolution. You know, we're on an ascent, but specifically, you know, this idea of interconnectedness, and you mentioned it from the very beginning, of how everything is correlated, how everything relates to everything else, and this is just confirmed, you know, by studying science and even quantum physics. We can talk about entanglement and stuff like that. So this goes beyond just not believing in a creator being. Like, you have a different attitude, you have a different perspective toward nature, toward life, and toward our place as human beings, like in the grand scheme of things, which is very important. So there are ramifications. There's a natural progression which leads to veganism, and I think you mentioned veganism, and obviously ahimsa, doing no harm.
Yeah.
You know, trying to avoid, minimizing and avoiding pain and suffering as much as possible. None of this stuff is involved in atheism. Like, atheism in and of itself, it if it's not married with secular humanism, then you could be an atheist and you could be a serial killer. You could torture and abuse animals, and so it means nothing. Atheism just means you don't believe in God. That's all it means. So
Right. Yeah.
like and what I'm trying to say is everything you just described. See, I'm not going to use the religious words, but let's say everything you just described, those are characteristics and attributes of nature. Okay, and those attributes of nature, and even of our own nature, of our own sort of progressive ascent into, I would say, apotheosis, but let's just say to becoming a more balanced, organism that's living in harmony with its environment and living in harmony with the other life forms around it. That all of that, okay, is not included in atheism, but all of that represents pantheism and represents the pantheistic ideal of recognizing that all things are divine, and that's what divine actually means. Is it's something that is worthy of reverence, something that is so absolutely paramount and important and significant. That's what divine actually means. It's something that is of utmost importance and supersedes all. And there is nothing more important than our biology and our interaction with the natural world, because nature is everything. Nature is what allows you to speak. Nature is what allows us to grow and evolve and adapt and survive. And nature is what protects us and fuels us and educates us. It's everything. So do you see how nature actually represents the greatest authority, the greatest source of intelligence and power?
Well, I can kind of get that. However, I think what's difficult is that when we start, for example, when we start looking at it in that sense and using even something like intelligence, which I would agree that when it comes down to a definition of intelligence, you know what I mean? I mean, what does intelligence really mean? And
let's make some distinctions. Let's make some distinctions right now. Okay.
Yeah.
When you cut your arm and your body goes to work healing the cells, what would you call that? Would you call that benevolent? Would you call it intelligent? Or would you just call it a random, thoughtless process that has no purpose or significance or meaning? What would you call it?
Well, first of all, to make things perfectly clear, there's nothing random. Nothing literally random, because everything is caused, you know. And of course, Trick would disagree with me on that. But here's the thing. Yeah, obviously, we would consider that a benevolent or intelligent process, because and here's why. Because when a building or some other machine breaks down, and then you've got a team of humans working together to fix that building or whatever it is, we call that an intelligent process.
Beautiful analogy, man. It's a beautiful analogy.
So we absolutely have to, by that same reasoning, we have to say that when our blood cells and all our body parts do that to repair the body when it's damaged, we have to also call that an intelligent process. Otherwise, we're applying a double standard that makes no sense. So by that kind of,
so let's move on. So moving on, we're in agreement. Absolutely, this is the point. We're in accord when it comes to this. There is intelligence in nature. There is intelligence that brings about balance and homeostasis, and through this constant chaotic flux of destruction and creation, there is order, and an organization comes about. Life organizes. It organizes on its own. That is a level of intelligence. Now, here's the key distinction. Within that intelligence, is there volition? Is there agency? Is there discretion? Is there a level of consciousness that is self-aware of each of the individual processes that are transpiring, that are taking place? And I would answer no. Because nature is not a conscious, coherent entity. It is a collective amalgamation of incalculable, events and and circumstances and situations and movements and actions. And yet within the system itself, within the laws of nature, within electromagnetism and strong and weak nuclear force and gravity and entropy, within these laws of nature, these laws of physics, programmed in, or let's say just latent within the very fabric of reality, is the potential for all of this complexity and order and organization and beauty to come about. So think of it like that we're literally talking about an unconscious living organism that is sort of mentally and morally asleep, but running on autopilot. And the laws of nature are literally the latent memory of, I don't want to use the religious language, but let's say of the omnia. The omnia is my word for the universe, my word for nature, and all of the various manifestations of it. So within the omnia is this incredible intelligence and this penchant, this proclivity toward complexity and order and organization. And that can only be described as some form of intelligence, be it conscious or not. Agreed?
Yeah, I would think so. But here's an interesting point I'd like to make. I would actually argue that an unconscious process that efficiently does the job is superior to a conscious process. And here's what I mean, Pafo. Because if you look at the performance of machines that are on autopilot, basically machines that, such as automatic opening doors, or cars that drive themselves, or computers that can do all sorts of incredible processing and find prime numbers and all sorts of stuff. When you look at even the machines that humans have built that do these sorts of things, they surpass the performance of any conscious human being. And so what we're talking about is, we could call it subconscious or non-conscious or even superconscious if we want, because it's beyond the level of a human and their consciousness, because we as humans do not even make very good door openers.
Hey, listen, you froze up there for a minute, so I'm not sure if the camera recorded or not. So maybe just repeat what you just said.
Yeah, okay. Like here's an analogy to get my point across, and what I was trying to say here is basically, like, let's say we have, those automatic opening doors that are at high V where I work. Whenever there's a sensor, there's an eye there, an electric eye, that when they get a certain distance in front of it, then the doors just open and the customers come in. And it's so efficient, so efficient, so effective. Whereas if we had to have a human just opening a door every time somebody walk by, that human would get bored, they would get tired, their time would get thrown off, that they would be so inferior.
It's an incredible point. It's an incredible point. I mean, what you're talking about is the distinction between a programmed awareness and sort of a conscious awareness that's susceptible to distraction and and ulterior motives and things like that. So yeah, it's a tremendous point. I mean, your sort of mechanical brain, your uber logical brain comes up with that. And you mentioned what did you say? A super conscious. How about meta consciousness? A meta consciousness that's beyond
that's a new
ordinary
word.
and extraordinary. Ordinary causal phenomenon and events. I mean, yeah, you're making my points for me, man. So let's try and stay focused and move on. We're trying to avoid the language so you don't get hung up, but we're literally just talking about science and nature and physical laws. Okay. Let's talk about the experience. Let's talk about what it means when a person is inspired by music or by some form of natural scenery, or being at the top of a mountain, or like sitting under a cascading waterfall, or swimming in the ocean at night, and like watching the full moon rise, or just like anything, just interacting with nature and plants and animals, and watching plants grow, and seeing how life forms and organisms interact, and there's just such phenomenal beauty and intricacy in it, and there's such subtle and complexity, so much subtlety and complexity, simultaneously is going on that we can't help but be enamored and in awe and of these natural processes. But of course, if you're not privy to these things, if you spend all day behind a computer screen and you're just playing video games, or you're indoors, or you're just not, you're raised in an environment that where you're not really reflective and contemplative and experiencing these things, you're not going to have the same. This is an awareness that needs to be cultivated. It's an awareness that needs to essentially sort of be taught and guided. You need to guide a person into this way of thinking. Or most people who are pantheists or biopans, they've this is a natural organic process. They've come about this understanding on their own, but it needs to be cultivated. It needs to be maintained. I mean, I have to remind myself continuously, of the food I'm taking into my body and what I'm doing, and the miraculous nature of all these things. And so there's another word, miraculous. Let's just say the extraordinary nature of all these things. And that's the difference. Is there is a heightened sort of acute awareness of what others would consider mundane. And so there's this experiential aspect of pantheism as well. We're not just talking about doctrine. We're not just talking about, facts and statistics and numbers. We're talking about looking at the Hubble telescope, looking through that telescope and seeing, the galaxies and the cosmos, the star clusters and the incredible, just you're overwhelmed at the vastness of it all, at the the power and the weight and the gravity of it. It just hits you, and that's an emotional experience. So there's this emotional aspect to it as well that you won't get if you're sort of segregated and cut off and not interacting with natural systems and with elements and the seasons and even with other life forms. It's very important that we always recognize that there is something miraculous behind every every species, every set of eyes that you're looking at. There's wonder and there's magic there. There's magic that's going on there. So, I mean, there you go. See, magic. There's no such thing as magic, right? But there are experiences that can be magical and that can be transformative and moving and inspirational.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the interesting thing about it, Pafo, is it's very interesting because like people have emotional experiences in response to these things you mentioned, and I mean, and that's true. But what's particularly interesting about it, though, is we don't necessarily need there's different ways of interpreting those emotional experiences, and that's what's key about it. And it seems to me that hopefully that would be enough, that it's enough to appreciate the trees and the flowers and the animals, and unfortunately don't see enough of that living in the city. I'm stuck in the city and I hate it. I want to live. I like being out in the middle of nowhere, because that's the best thing. But we but here's the thing: is that should be enough without having to go to some other traditional religion to explain it. And what I'm hoping is that people will see that, is that they're like, they can look at these things and appreciate these things for what they are, but then they don't have to get caught up in a whole theology or some kind of a big long thing that distracts them from it.
Right, the doctrine, the dogma, and the rituals, the self-imposed rituals, and the very limiting egocentric aspects of most of the traditional religions. Yeah, absolutely. There is no need to to always invoke the belief in an alternative reality. This reality, this natural world, holds more wonder and significance and importance and meaning and adventure, and it's everything that we want is here. It's on this earth. It's on this planet, or let's just say it's in the human experience, in the experience of being alive. And so pantheists recognize this, and we're not looking to an alternate realm, an alternate world. And again, just a real quick side note, that we're not discounting paranormal experiences, a lot of really odd and unexplainable phenomenon that goes on. I believe that we should investigate those. We should get to the bottom of what those things are. We're talking about like psychic phenomenon and out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. I'm 100% for the exploration into these things, with an open mind, but not with a preconceived notion of what they are. So we're not going to go into something already believing that there are ghosts and spirits and supernatural entities, because that'll just taint our interpretation of these events. So,
yeah, well, yeah. See, what I agree with that. See, and here's the important thing, Paulfo, is that I think the hardest part about people overcoming their traditional religions is giving up the belief in an afterlife. I think that's really hard for them, because, and here's what's bizarre, is that this idea of an afterlife, which of course is based on the idea that there is an us independent of the brain, independent of nature, sort of. Like, that's kind of what they seem to think. And it's also, along with that idea, comes the idea that this world is not enough. It's almost like they're not appreciating nature here. They're not appreciating what's here, and they think that they would rather die and go to some other place that's better.
Think about when these religions evolve. Think about where the geographic location and the in terms of chronology, the time period, the era in which these religions were formulated. I mean, they formulated over time, but we're talking about the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age and the Iron Age are when most of these religions came about. So, like, these were incredibly oppressive, brutal, depressing time periods to exist in, where you were always the threat of your life, the threat of being conquered by an invading army, or being killed by some natural disaster or some plague or disease, or by wild animals. So like these religious times of hardship are necessary, almost a human survival mechanism to the most accurate picture of the world, really, I believe, could only come about, in our time, with modernity. Like, we now have a greater understanding than we ever have in recorded history, anyway, that we know of the natural processes and how the world works and stuff. So we're aware of the real source of diseases. We know that these things aren't caused by demonic infestation. We understand germ theory. We understand there are microorganisms and things like that. So, like, we're talking about, like, how, why do people cling? I mean, really, the question is, why are they still clinging to these myths and stories that were, founded during some of the hardest times, where it was probably necessary on some level to sort of exaggerate and maybe extrapolate and adding superstition and mysticism to it, because they didn't understand the real causes behind things. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. There's no reason for it to persist today. And then I've said there's no reason that religion, without an inordinate amount of cherry picking, how the hell could it still stand today? It's because there's a significant need, and it's because of what religions provide, and it's because they're not actually reading their holy books in their entirety. They're just picking and choosing the parts.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Pafo, and it's very important, because what I'm hoping is I'm hoping that we can get, like, the appreciation for nature, the good aspects that are here, without getting into, like, this whole thing where it's like, it's okay. Now, it's hard for me to explain this, but it's basically that's never good enough for them. They have to force everyone to believe that their God created the world and will punish them in some afterlife if they don't conform. And I see this religion as, you know, this negative force where it's about shaming and guilting and scaring people into behaving a certain way.
That's what ends up happening. It doesn't intend to be. I don't believe on a fundamental level that they're trying to deceive people. Well, let's say the religious leaders are, for certain, because there's a monetary incentive involved. But generally, the most believers, they cling to it because it's helpful on some level to them. But because there are these archaic concepts sort of built in, you end up with this guilt promoting, you know, sort of denigrating, you know, this denigrating action that happens, especially with evangelical Christianity and stuff, and Islam. And so you have things that are based on guilt and fear and punishment, and a lot of I don't know, a lot of like us versus them mentality. You know, a lot of really segregating. I mean, it's just as bad as politics. You know, it just, religions separate and divide people. Pantheism is a philosophy that could be considered a religion, but really it's just a form of spirituality that actually unites people, actually brings together, you know, all nations, all ages, all social groups, because we have this commonality, that these universal aspects that we
Right.
recognize. That's
Yeah,
the
I
difference.
get it. Because like rather than saying, "Oh, well, we're of this religion, you're of that religion, therefore you're an enemy, you're bad, you're good," you know, instead we're all saying we're all part of the same thing. What makes us all same same team is the idea.
The enemy is ignorance. The enemy is ignorance and racism and bigotry and you know, disparity between human beings and societies. I wanted to say something else. I mean, you're making all these great points. I mean, you're making the points for me, really. But let's talk about really quick another distinction, that pantheism is not so much a religion. It is a religious attitude toward nature. It is and let's say specifically in Biopan, it is not it is not the mystifying of nature. It's recognizing that nature really is extraordinary, and there are seemingly seemingly mystical, transcendent aspects to it. And so we're going to be very careful about this. Like, there is no transcendent world, but we can absolutely have a transcendent experience, something that moves you and motivates you and taps into your deepest being, and like allows you to sort of rise above your primal nature, you know. And that gets into something else as well, is that we're not isolating parts of the human being. We're not segregating aspects of ourselves and saying this part of me is dirty and bad and undesirable, and then this part of me is good, and we're going to you know, idealize it. And this is basically personifying the different aspects of the reptile brain and the frontal lobe, or you know, the carnal nature, and then, you know, the spirit. Like, we're not doing that. We're embracing it holistically, and we're seeing the whole as you know, a valuable integrated system that just needs to be further refined and developed. And that's the process, through the process of evolution. So the damaging aspects of religion come from that, these extreme sort of these in psychology, I guess it would be called isolation, where you separate aspects, you know, and you segregate, and you split yourself up into like all these different parts, or let's say two parts, like good and bad. And it's not like that. Obviously there are healthy and destructive behaviors, you know, that come about. But, you know, as someone who rejects the myth of free will, that you know, everything is causal, and everything comes from a prior source, or some previous influence, externally or internally. So it's a more holistic understanding of things, as opposed to such a truncated viewpoint, which is what most
Yeah, and here's an aspect of reality that a lot of people are missing. because they don't understand the myth of free will, because they don't understand causality. They just see that somebody's doing something that they don't like, or that's against their religion. And that gets into a whole other thing, you know, that, and yet they don't stop to think about why a person does that sort of a thing. And
Sure.
and this is where it gets so interesting, man, because you'll find that most of the, I think maybe not everything, but a large majority of things that are done, whether good or bad, we can leave the value judgments aside for now, are done basically for our survival, you know, to seek pleasure, avoid pain. All of it, it's actually very simple when you realize it, that when people argue, even over when it is politics, they are worried and fearful that this person getting into office is a threat to their survival. Therefore, they have to convince people to vote for this other person. And so they're all in survival mode. They're all in panic mode. And that's why they're irrational. That's why you can't reason with them, because they're scared. And when people are scared, bad things happen.
It's a fight or flight instinct. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Chandler, I mean, you're making great points. Let's try and keep it. Let's try and keep this as focused as we can, though. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, and you know, I also am starting to recognize that you've still got a lot of issues when it comes to religion. So it's almost like you need a cathartic. You need to be able to talk about
there's something you said earlier I want to go back to
about religion. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but there was something you said earlier that I want to get back to about like a religious attitude toward nature. And I think we need to get into, you know, what is a religious attitude? You know, what does that even mean?
Okay, let's make this distinction. We're not talking about nature worship. We're not talking about worshiping or idolizing anything. We're talking about recognizing the value and the significance of the natural processes and of our and a more healthy and sober attitude of our place in the ecosystem. So that is, to me, that's again, pantheists have redefined. We're taking back all the religious terms and we're redefining them. So when I say a religious attitude toward nature, I mean an attitude of reverence and respect, not of fear, not of the not of the obligation to worship anything, but that there should be a healthy respect. Obviously, you respect a hurricane. Obviously, you respect your body when it tells you you have to go to the bathroom, or when you feel hungry, you listen to it. Obviously, we need to respect other life forms with whom we share the planet, because we're not alone in this experience.
Yeah, and in fact, here's what's interesting about it, Paul. The very word respect has very different meanings, because sometimes you respect something because you're scared of it, you know, but there's different kinds of respect. So we need to think about that. Like, for example, let me say this: when I was a Christian, I never respected the God that I believed in back then. In in a good sense, it was only fear. It's all, oh, you have to please God or it'll burn you in hell. You know, it was all fear based, and I realize that now. And so, if we can be not fearful of nature, that would be nice, because I think people are going to be coming out of their religion with all this fear, and it's about teaching them not to be afraid of the things they've been taught to be afraid. You know,
you're making a very complex point, actually. In early human history, in most of human history, actually, it was healthy to be afraid of nature, and nature was our enemy, and it was a threat. It was a continuous threat, and I shouldn't have to really go into that and explain that. I mean, it's obvious. So it's only now, with the advancements that we've made in technology and being able to sort of restructure and build things and restructure our environment, that we're able to have a more symbiotic relationship with nature. Of course, you could say the Aborigines and the Native Americans had a very close, very integrated symbiotic relationship with the natural world and with the living systems around them. but they respect it. I would say actually Native Americans are the closest to what the attitude that we're trying to propagate here, and that we're trying to cultivate. But there is something to be said that at this point in human history, we have a greater capacity to embrace nature than we ever did before, because we've devised ways to protect ourselves from it, so to speak, and that we didn't have before. So a pantheistic attitude was probably existent in many parts of the world at different time periods, where life was a little bit a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier. Otherwise, they were literally sacrificing and petitioning and praying to the forces of nature to allow their crops to grow, and to not, for these sicknesses and pestilence relationship back then. But at this point, I think we can really have a loving relationship with nature, and recognize it, that we don't have to be angry with with the things that threaten us, because all of those things actually refine us, and they strengthen us, and this is the process of natural selection and evolution. They make us stronger. They push us to grow. If there was no, I've said this before, there's no contrast, if there was no resistance, if there's no mountain to climb, I mean, your muscles atrophy and you would be weak, and you would never really develop and expand and innovate. So it's very important that there is a level of resistance, but at the same time, we can alter, and we can make things better now, more so than we ever have before, and that boils down to our attitude of understanding and respect. Not that we should conquer and dominate nature, and that it's just a resource to be used and harvested, but that it's a living system, that we're dependent on it, and it is dependent on us. Actually, we always say, if the humans disappeared, every other species would thrive, right?
Yeah, it gives you an important.
It doesn't need us. Let's just say nature doesn't need us, but because of human populations and our encroachment in these, in these ecosystems, nature needs us now to get our shit under control, so to speak. So that's the part where it needs us.
It
never
really
needed
puts
us
things
before.
in perspective.
It only needs us now because we've done so much damage. But there should be a relationship there, basically.
Yeah, well, what it comes down to is it puts things in perspective when you realize that as soon as all the species of bees go extinct, then we're doomed, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they pollinate. They pollinate 95% of our crops, our vegetation. So
Right.
we're dependent on the bees, and we're dependent on. We've said this before, on the gut bacteria, the microorganisms in our body. We're dependent on all the cells in our bodies to be operating and working in homeostasis. So.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, Pafo. But when you look at it from this type of viewpoint, you start seeing that even the bacteria and the tiniest insects, they would be what I would look at as the most positive parts of life. I would view those types of things to be pretty, for the most part, like, I see certain parts of nature based on behavior as more benevolent, whereas others are more malevolent, in a certain sense. Like that.
Let's not use the word malevolent, but let's just say a threat, sort of an unconscious threat. They are not conscious. The other aspects of nature are just doing what they're programmed to do for their own survival. They have their own prime directives, and they're just trying to survive and propagate like every other species.
See,
so
and what
it's
I'm
not
doing,
really malevolent. It's just it may be dangerous or threatening to us, and so that comes with understanding. That we're not going to take a baseball bat and hit a bee's nest, a wasp nest, and play around. We're not going to throw rocks at a mama bear, that's watching over her cubs, because we're going to suffer the consequences. It's just a healthy understanding and an education.
And here's what people don't get, Pafo, and this is something that a lot of people will never truly understand, is that I'm describing things in terms of their actual behavior. when I say that something, when a certain species or a certain animal or whatever, or a certain force, whatever is good or bad, benevolent or malevolent, what they have to understand is I'm just describing what it is. If we say
what it is in relation to you, what it is in relation to our experience, not what it is
right,
intrinsically.
exactly.
It's not that it's intrinsically evil. It's just
right.
Scary or possibly damaging or threatening to us.
Right. See, when we're infected with a bacteria or a virus that makes us sick, something like that, there's not, like, a lot of us would call that a bad thing, but I'm not saying that there's agency. I'm not saying that there's agency or choice or any of that sort of thing.
Right. And that's the distinction. And that's the distinction that the pagans actually had trouble with. So they personified the various aspects of nature. So you had a god for every ailment and for every disease and for every pleasure. And so we are looking at it much more holistically, in a much more sort of rational, intellectual way. But so we're in agreement. We're in agreement on all these things, and I've been talking about pantheism this entire episode, Chandler. So if you're in agreement with everything I'm saying, you see how you're actually a pantheist. You're actually more in line with pantheistic thinking than atheistic thinking.
Yeah, well, I see what you're saying there, and I would agree, Pafo. The tricky part here, and here's where I think I struggle. The tricky part is because the reason that I latched onto the term atheism in the first place was because, first of all, there was no such thing. I didn't know. I'd never heard of pantheism or biopantheism. Certainly, that I'd never ever heard of that. And another reason is because because I knew of all the famous atheists. Okay, I listened to the podcasts, I watched the documentaries.
And they're the smartest guys,
Yeah,
they end up being the most rational. Sure.
Yeah, and that's just it. Is they happen to be the smartest, most educated people. And one thing was very clear. They were just as aware of the harms inherent in Christianity as I was, what was wrong with the worldview. And so I wanted to be able to tell the world, well, I'm one of those guys. I want to say, I'm not part of these religious people here. I'm part of these guys who see there's something wrong.
Great point, Travis. Let me just say, within Biopan, there is a very strong anti-theist sentiment. Okay, not within pantheism, and this makes a distinction between Biopan and the rest of the pantheist community. There is a very strong anti-religious, anti-theist, atheistic sentiment of pursuing logic and reason and basing everything on science and demonstrable evidence, and especially historical accuracy. And this is where I stand above the rest. I'll say it. I care about truth. I care about history. I care about the real origins of these religious systems. And I am absolutely 100% opposed to them as much as any atheist would be. So you don't have to stop associating yourself with atheism. You can be an atheist and a pantheist at the same exact time. You're being an atheist is just literally describing your attitude toward one aspect of life, of societal culture, and that's it. So once we've got that established, be an atheist for the rest of your life. I'm an atheist when it comes to Islam. I'm an atheist when it comes to Christianity. I'm an atheist when it comes to Judaism and every other, what is it, something like 40,000 religions that have existed. I don't believe in any of those gods. I don't believe in any of those sort of delusionary systems of glorified mythology is all they are, really. But now here's the point. Here's what where it goes further. What do I believe, Chandler? What do I believe about my origins, about the purpose of life? How do I feel about nature? That's what makes the difference. So we've already established what we don't believe and what we want to reject. And I continue to reject those things. A cat just jumped on the window, is making noise. I continue to reject those things, okay? And you can too. And you can fight against them. And with all the vehemence and ardor and gusto that you can muster up, because they need to be abolished. But I'm in the business of also teaching and promoting science and biology and astrophysics and cosmology and chemistry, and especially ecology and understanding of natural systems. So let's talk about that. Let's keep it focused and let's talk about that. Like, natural systems are the most important subject because we are dependent upon them, and we are intimately entangled, in these processes. So that's where our focus really should be, and our attitude towards them will sort of dictate where we go in life, like the direction we move in. If we're going to be environmentalists, if we're going to recycle, if we're going to not pollute, how we treat other animals, other life forms, other non-human animals. It's very important. It's the most important thing, and that's not included in atheism, and that's not included in pantheism. It's only in biopan do all of these sort of these sentiments and important topics sort of collide in a synchronistic fashion.
Yeah, well, and here's the deal. We've covered so much ground, but I am running out of time, man. And so this is gonna be an ongoing discussion.
Let's make this part one, and we'll have a part two like later on when you're free, and we'll just continue.
Yeah, because I think we're establishing you can be an atheist and a pantheist at the same time. Atheism is like what you're not about, what you don't believe, and where with the pantheism or biopantheism, we're going more in the direction of, well, beyond that, what do we believe, what do we stand for? And I like that because it's more positive rather than negative, because I don't want to just promote the stereotype that I don't believe anything, And actually, I don't think believe is strong enough of a word. It's a very weak word, and
let's say awareness. That your awareness, that you have an awareness of of the natural systems, of the natural order. You have an awareness of the forces and powers that are inherent in nature, that came before us, that are antecedent to human civilization. So this is very important. This is the key.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll have to have a part two to this, and but this has been great talk, Pafo. So let's get this out to the world, get these great talks out there. But
all right, brother. To be continued.
All right.
So I appreciate it, and I hope all the listeners have enjoyed this first episode of Sacred Places, the Pantheist Experience. And until next time, be safe.
Yeah. Goodbye.